everyone, welcome back. My name's Diana. This is my channel Bookish Di, and today I am wrapping up my October reading. So this is going to be a shorter video because once again, this wasn't a huge reading month for me. I only read 5 books for a couple of reasons. One, I had some family come visit and that took up a bunch of time. And then 2, I just wasn't really in the right mental space to read. I was playing more video games. So yeah, this was a smaller reading month than what I've been hoping for, but I did enjoy the stuff that I read. There were 2 rereads and 2 new books, and yeah, I enjoyed everything that I consumed. So to get started, the first book that I read was Late Eclipses by Shauna McGuire. This is the 4th book in the October Days series. This is part of my reread project of the series for the podcast Fangirl Happy Hour with KJ and Renee. And yeah, this book is pretty fantastic. This book in particular is where the Toby Day series really goes pedal to the metal. This is the start of the 4th book Wham episode pattern that Shauna McGuire has. So every 3rd book there's kind of like a big event, but every 4th book there's what I like to call it a Wham episode, because Toby learns something about herself, about Fairy, that completely recontextualizes everything that she thought she knew, and that happens in this book. So this book starts with Toby being awarded the empty county, or the empty county of Golden Green, and elevated to the rank of Countess by the Queen of the Mists. And it turns out that's a trap, and she's being targeted not only by the queen, but by the appearance of an old enemy, and she has to deal with that threat to herself as well as to her allies. And I can't go into too many details for spoilers, but yeah, I really love this book. 4.5 out of 5 stars. And it was really nice to reread because it has been a while since I've read this particular book. The second book that I read in October was listening to the audiobook of If the Shoe Fits, written by Julie Murphy, narrated by Jen Ponton. This is the first in Disney Publishing Group's first ever adult romance series. So it's a series of books that are retellings of classic Disney movies written by authors. So this one was by Julie Murphy and was a retelling of Cinderella. The next book in the series is going to be Beauty and the Beast, written by Jasmine Guillory. And this book centers on Sydney, who is a recent fashion school graduate who loves shoes. And she's just graduated. She's a bit at a loss of what to do because she had kind of a breakdown during her final year at fashion school, because just kind of catch up grief from the death of her father during her final year of high school. And so she's moving back to LA to live with her stepmother, her stepsisters, and her half-siblings. And during that time, her stepmother, who is the executive producer on a bachelor-like dating show called At the Stroke of Midnight, is looking to cast, and so she and her stepsisters join, and it turns out that the Prince Charming that season is the man that Sydney had met at the airport on her way back to LA, and that she had really hit it off with. So I had heard about this book from Beautifully Bookish Bethany. She had talked about it in her wrap-up and said that it was a really charming romance with a fat heroine who's finding love in a reality dating show. And it sounded, something that I might be interested in. So I put a hold on it at the library, and it came in, and I really enjoyed it. I really liked Sydney and how throughout the book she's learning to really prioritize herself and her goals and to think about what does she want. And I also really like Sydney's dynamics with her stepfamily. So one of the updates that Julie Murphy made with this story is that the stepfamily is no longer quote unquote evil. They have had, their difficulties in the past, but by the time the story takes place, they're, in a good spot. Sydney really likes her stepsisters and her stepmother. She respects them. There's sometimes a little bit of Sydney and her stepmother don't always know how to communicate because Eleanor Tremaine came into Sydney's life when Sydney was, a little bit older. She had already had the dynamics with her father. And so So they have a different relationship than Eleanor and Sydney's stepsisters, Anastasia and Drew, but I really liked that. The mice in this case are Sydney's half-siblings, so they had been born via surrogate after Sydney's father died. And I enjoyed the romance, so if you're looking for something that isn't steamy, this would be a good book for you. Everything is fade to black. At most, there's just making out on page. So if you're looking for a romance that doesn't have a lot of sex or any sex at all, this would be a good book for you. I also really enjoyed Sydney's dynamics with the other characters, and because she does form relationships with the other contestants. Like, there is a mean girl contestant who's an XP of the Peloton lady from that really creepy commercial that came out a couple years ago, I think, at this point. Anyway, so, you know, she's, you know, kind of awful, but she's like the only one, and everyone else is really supportive. And part of what's going on with Sydney is her trying to navigate the dynamics of, I'm friends with these women, I like these women, but we're competing for the same thing. And so yeah, I enjoyed that. I enjoyed one of the other producers who we spent time with. Her name's Bex. She's a delight. So yeah, this was really fun. I would give it somewhere between 3.75 to 4 stars out of 5. If you're looking for a fun contemporary romance that has elements of a fairy tale, if you're looking for romance starring a fat heroine, this is a good one for you. After that, I listened to the audiobook of Clap When You Land, written by Elizabeth Acevedo, narrated by Elizabeth Acevedo and Melania Luisa Marte. This is Acevedo's 3rd book. It is a novel in prose, and it centers on two half-sisters who don't know they're related at first. And so there's Camino Rios, who lives in the Dominican Republic with her aunt, and every summer waits for the arrival of her father from New York. And then in New York City, there's Yahaira, who wants to go back to the Dominican Republic, because she's never been, who's kind of navigating some changed relationships with her father due to the discovery of a secret. And their worlds come into contact when their father dies in a plane crash on his way back to the Dominican Republic. I really loved this. This was absolutely lovely. So each sister narrates her own life. You get a sense of what each one is going through. So content warning in this one for sexual assault, attempted sexual assault, lots of sexism, but yeah, this was just absolutely beautiful. This is the first book by Acevedo I've read, and I definitely am interested in reading her backlist, because this was just, I really liked how she captured both how similar and how different the two sisters were, and how they're trying to navigate their cultures in each of their spots. So with Yahaira, the Dominican American culture, living in New York City, and Camino living in the Dominican Republic as well, and the realities of living in a place that is a tourist destination, and how that might impact a young girl growing up there. I also enjoyed seeing the glimpses of their lives. So with Yahaira and her girlfriend and her mom, and Camino with her best friend and her aunt. This was just absolutely beautiful. The narration for both narrators was wonderful. I do have an ebook copy that I think I'm going to read at some point, just to see how the narration between the two sisters looks on page versus presented orally, because I think with poetry, like, part of it, the experience is listening to it, but I also like seeing how it's written on page. So yeah, I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. This was honestly one of the best books I've read this year, and I loved it. I loved Acevedo's writing. I loved her character work, and this is definitely an author I plan on picking up in the future. The 4th book I read in October was Culture Warlords, My Journey into the Dark Web of White Supremacy by Talia Levine. This is a book that I had kind of picked up on a whim at my library a few months ago. So I'm familiar with Talia Levine. So she is a journalist who specializes in documenting white supremacy. And I had seen her on Twitter before and read her tweets talking about Charlottesville, talking about the rise of more open white supremacy during the Trump years. And so this was something that was kind of on my radar before I found it at the library. And I ended up just kind of picking it up off my shelf of library books. So this book, as it says, documents how Talia Levine monitors white supremacy, how, like, the different methods. It goes into the roots of racism and anti-Semitism of the United States and how that plays out with white supremacy and how it's currently demonstrated. This was it was dark, like it was very tough, but I do think it was necessary to read, especially given everything that's going on. I'm filming this the day after the Virginia election, where the GOP was basically able to use racism and the specter of quote-unquote critical race theory as a way to win elections. So I do think this was necessary read. I do think that there were parts I think that could have been better. So one particular issue that I did have with this book was the arguments within chapters kind of jumped around. It didn't always feel super cohesive. And I think part of the other problem is, or one of my other issues is that she only really spends kind of one chapter talking about like how people are trying to fight the rise of white supremacy and fascism. So there's only really one chapter about anti-fascism or Antifa. So I think that was one of the other issues I had, but it was mainly just in terms of like narrative cohesion. But I did think that a lot of what was in here was really important. I am glad that I read it, just because I think knowing what's out there and shining a light on it is really important, because a lot of these types of things fester when people aren't looking or aren't deliberately looking. So if you're interested in learning more about white supremacy and what's going on with that and how our current web structure kind of encourages it or allows it to grow, then this would be a good book for you. I ended up giving this about 3.5 stars out of 5 because there was good information, but I do think there were things that could have been done better. And the last book that I read in the month of October was another reread. It was another Seanan McGuire. It was One Salt Sea. This is the 5th Toby Day book. This follows Toby and her attempts to stop a war between the Kingdom and the Mists and the Undersea when the Duchess of Saltsea's 2 sons are kidnapped, and Toby, as a way to pay off her debt to the Lushak, has to try and find the boys and deal with the consequences of it. So this is a book I hadn't read in a while, but on a reread, I actually enjoyed it a lot more than I enjoyed it more than I remember. It was very fast paced. Everything kind of played into the main plot, where sometimes in the previous books, it didn't always feel that way. And I like how she handled the characters. There's a part at the end where Toby's going through shock because something happens. And again, spoilers, I don't want to spoil it, but McGuire does a very good job of in-text communicating how Toby's dealing with this shock and just her distance from, or like trying to keep emotional distance from it. So again, I really enjoyed this. I ended up bumping my initial review up to 5 stars because this was just, like I said, better than I remembered. I really enjoyed one of the characters that gets introduced in this book, Dianda. She is the Duchess of Saltmist, and she's a Marrow, and she really likes to punch things, and it is a constant constant struggle not to punch things that need punching. And she's the best, and her husband Patrick has narrative immunity because if anything happened to him, she would derail the entire plot. So yeah, a couple goals right there. So really enjoyed this book, and I'm really looking forward to the next book in our reread as well, which is Ashes of Honor. Book 6 is Ashes of Honor. So that was my October in books. Fairly solid in books of quality, not super great in books of quantity. So I'm really hoping I can read more in the month of November and kind of kick it up a gear and finish 2021 on a strong note, but we'll see. So have you read any of the books that I read in the month of October? Do you have opinions on them? Do any of the books that I read sound interesting interesting to you, please let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoy what you see, please like and subscribe. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll talk with you later. Bye.